Welcome back to another episode with ByrdAdatto. We have been covering for a while now the closings and reopenings in many different states. We've obviously talked a lot about Texas and California and other states, but we felt like we needed to start diving in deeper into other states that are partially open. And so today we brought back a special guest that, Michael, I'd love for you to introduce.
Well, many of you know Alex, but what you don't know is that he now wants to be introduced as a Michael Jordan aficionado first, and then second as I'm hoping tied for second as CEO and founder of AmSpa and partner at ByrdAdatto.
It's not wants to be introduced that way. It's needs. It's a need.
Well, and so we're super excited to have Alex there because one of the things that for a lot of y'all aren't aware of, Alex also is the managing partner of our Chicago office. And like a lot of states, as they're reopening, sort of, kind of, maybe, there are a lot of confusion as to what states are open, and if they are open, how open are they, and who has these kind of controls. And so we wanted to bring Alex in that really talk about Illinois.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys. And I guess we anticipated there would probably be some issues as we moved along with this in the reopening process. Illinois is behind because I think they're second or third in the number of COVID cases, and the cases have plateaued, but they're not going down. It looks like we're in a pretty good trend, but Governor Pritzker has been fairly conservative with the reopening steps. And I think what we saw was just how difficult it's going to be to define some of these rules. We saw that in Texas, and Texas came out with a couple new ones. The medical board was very involved, and they revised it so that there was some clarity. In Illinois, what they did was they issued, in kind of a similar way, two kind of deadlines where folks could open up. The first was with ambulatory non-necessary surgeries. And the way the order read, this was by the Department of Health, it said that for ambulatory surgery centers, which obviously is a specific type of license, as well as hospitals, elective surgeries, non-medically necessary surgeries could begin on May 11th, which obviously was last week. And that was good news for a lot of folks because especially if you're talking about plastic surgery or dermatologic surgery, those could proceed. The problem was, and I don't necessarily blame them for this, they didn't mention anything about medical spas. Simply because I don't think that they knew or have any real idea what medical spas are. What they did then was set a secondary deadline, which would be the end of May, that's coming up next week, that would allow other types of businesses like salons and whatnot to start the process of opening up. They didn't mention medical spas in that order either, although it's kind of assumed that we would fall into that category, but it's not. It's definitely not explicit. So there's been a lot of confusion whether or not medical spas and non-surgical elective procedures could start to proceed. And frankly, we don't really have any answers. As AmSpa, we've reached out to the IDFPR numerous times. We reached out to the Department of Health. We've reached out to some of the contacts that we have there, and nobody seems to really have any idea. And I think what was most kind of frustrating for us is not only do they not have any idea, they just didn't seem to really care too much, which I understand because in the world of priorities, it's probably not the biggest priority. But nevertheless, there's been a lot of med spas who have started to open and just kind of said we're going to open anyway, or just assumed that they were included in that initial deadline. And then a lot of the other ones who were trying to follow the rules have been asking us questions and trying to hold back a little bit. And we've been unable to give them any other advice than to say, look, there's some potential risk if you open early before this I think it's May 29th deadline, simply because med spas are clearly not included in that order. They're not a surgical center and they're not a hospital. So there's some risk. I don't know how much risk. We're probably going to find out a little bit more this week as we see how hard the state of Illinois starts clamping down on some of these folks. We saw in Texas there was some fairly aggressive action. I don't know what it's going to be like in Illinois. We're going to see, but I think it's pretty clear that by the end of the month everybody can open. And again, one thing I would just reiterate for all of our people watching and listening is that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Right? There's so many things that go into this decision. And I know we're all very anxious to get open and get business in the door and to start making money and to start bringing our employees back and all that. But Illinois is a pretty precarious state right now because we've got the second largest kind of metropolitan city area in the country, and this isn't going to go away right away. So it's been confusing, but I think as time goes on, it's going to clear up. We're going to know more this week, I think, for sure. Hopefully that makes sense and answers the question.
Yeah, and Alex, thank you. I mean, that's the problem is that we as attorneys, we want to be able to advise our clients as to the information that we have, and unfortunately, some states it's very confusing. And I think you make a really good point. That is, if you're not open, or if you do decide to open, make sure that you've actually done your housekeeping. You've done everything you need to do to open safely, because what we don't want to happen is, number one, you open outside of this potential rule, and then you have an exposure issue. And for those who are still closed that are gearing up to open, I know that AmSpa's done a good job of this, and I know that we've shot videos all about the things you need to be considering to reopen. So if you haven't seen that, go to AmSpa or go to our website and relook at all the videos we've shot on the important things you need to get your house in order before you open. You let that first person, before you let your staff back, even, and you start treating people.
And I would just add one thing, in that this really highlights the necessity, right? We always talk about compliance being kind of a risk-based analysis. Right now, it's necessary for you to have your house in order, because what we're seeing with these orders and our phone calls to the state government, the agencies, is that they really don't understand how medical spas fit into the whole construct of medical treatments. So my fear is that they are going to come in guns blazing because you've got the word spa in your title, and they're not going to realize what you're trying to do. So it's really important. And the other big complaint I've been getting from folks is that it's unfair that some people are opening. They worry about losing patients to those places because they're open and others are not. But nevertheless, for me, a week and a half, 2 weeks of delay is not worth the risk. And if you do open, make sure you've got yourself in order very, very, very tightly.
And we've talked, touched on this a little bit today, and we talked a little bit more in Texas that, there's risk with the government because they don't understand where med spa fits. You just kind of alluded to the risk with competitors who, are upset because some are open and they're not. And what we've realized or experienced last week in a different state is the employees. An office that was in an area that was a different state, was in New York, was looking to open, and it was questionable where it fit, although legally it looked like it would fit. Employees were like, no, you can't be open. They believed it to be like a spa. And so the risk is the employees are going to be the ones that cause the issue because they don't feel comfortable coming back to work.
I think that's a really good point. And when we've been talking, we've been on a number of webinars for various organizations, and it seems like we're all in agreement that the issues that are going to come are probably going to come from employees, not necessarily from patients. The patients want to come in, they understand the risk, they're willing to sign whatever you want them to sign. But the employees who are coming in are the ones who are really at risk because they're there every day, they're seeing multiple people. And again, even though you're open and you're even technically allowed to open, doesn't mean that the employees are going to want to come back. And you have a real duty under OSHA and just under under various laws and regulations to make sure that your workplace is safe and that the people feel safe. And as we've also talked about, perception is reality in this environment. If you've got employees who don't want to come in and you're forcing them to come in, or even worse, you're saying, you're going to terminate somebody because they don't want to come in, that could have potential repercussions, not because you're doing anything wrong legally, but just because it looks really bad. And so I want everyone to tread very, very carefully, move very, very slowly. There's just no reason for anyone to hurry into this. I'm not convinced that, we've got, it sounds like this pandemic is flattening and going down, which is great. But that doesn't mean it's going away, and there's still a lot of risk out there. So just be careful.
Right, and I think That's a great point. Is, I think we've said this before: safety first, and slow wins this time around. And so those who are accelerating and just having the people come back immediately, they're not following the new standard of care. I think is everyone would agree that having your employees having some type of minimum protection gear, the PPE that you're just referencing, all of those are very important factors. And if you don't have those things organized, I agree with you, Alex. It's not time to open because your exposure goes way up on the employees, the OSHA complaints or ADA complaints or medical board complaints, all of which will slow you down on the longer side because now you're dealing with an investigation.
Yeah, and you mentioned several times how many OSHA complaints have been filed just this month in the last couple of weeks. That's going to increase, I'm sure. And again, I don't think we can overstate the importance of the fact that most state medical boards, nursing boards, and governments don't understand how medical spas fit into the whole structure. And that is a real problem because if it doesn't matter if you're doing things correctly, if you're following the rules, if they don't understand how it works, they're going to come in and open an investigation anyway. And, then you've got all sorts of problems, and it's not good for business to have them poking around. So, until things return to a little bit of normalcy, I would just be very, very, very careful and cautious and take your time, especially in a state like Illinois, where we've seen, just by virtue of the orders that they put in place, a complete lack of understanding as to how these things work. So it's tough, but it's necessary.
Awesome. Michael, any follow-ups? Alex, always appreciate seeing you. Thank you again for joining us, and look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.